Greetings, Guardians. My name is Bife here. Our introduction into the Edge of Fate was heralded by one of Destiny's least understood characters, the Emissary of the Nine. This is a strange character for certain, but the reality is that she's more than just one character. In fact, by the time she dramatically sheds her old skin in the Edge of Fate trailer, she's actually beginning what would be her fifth life. Today, we're going to talk about all of them as we dive into some of her old lore and talk about what we've discovered about her since. I think that the most important thing to understand about the Emissary is that she's actually called Orin, though this wasn't her first name. Essentially, Orin was the Emissary's name in her third and, by most accounts, most impactful life. It's also the name that a lot of people in the lore use when they're referring to her. But to say that Orin is the Emissary is also sort of a mistake. Orin has her own personality, beliefs, dreams, and agenda that led her to become the Emissary of the Nine. However, the Emissary is also a kind of separate person, a more compliant tool and mouthpiece for the Nine. This is all going to get in really confusing territory very quickly, so let's jump in with a fact that should help to clarify and explain it a bit. Orin is still in there. Her personality is residing within the Emissary, and she's still able to concentrate a sense of self if need be. If she couldn't do this, she wouldn't have been able to escape the Nine at the start of the Edge of Fate. There's a prime example of why we know this, though, which can be found in the Prophecy Dungeon in-game. It's a very rare piece of dialogue that you can find if you discover the Emissary's location somewhere within the Wasteland. Normally, this happens after Encounter 2, and most of the time I imagine we're all racing onward to Rainbow Road and the final boss, so generally, not many people get to see this. However, if you find the Emissary, you can get dialogue. And in this instance, there is a line where it isn't the Emissary who speaks. Instead, it's Orin. Take a listen to this.
Guardian. Guardian, are you there? This is Orin, of the Firebreak Order, and the Pilgrim Guard before that. I have forced a respite from the Nine. I repeat, this is not their emissary. I've learned much from them. They believe many things that you need to hear, but for all their power, they are no less fallible than a tower consensus meeting. They think light and dark are set to war again. How and why, you would know better than them at this point. You're on the front line. Trust what you see, at your peril. Trust what you're told, at your peril, including anything you hear from this voice. The Nine cannot agree amongst themselves on a course of action, but that doesn't stop them from acting. They're curious about us, learning as much about us as we are from them with every interaction. Be brave, Guardian. You're walking the path. I know you can finish it.
This is distinct from other moments in Prophecy where the Emissary is the one speaking. But again, this is a demonstration of the third and fourth lives of the Emissary, and if we want to understand her entire story, we should really start with the beginning and talk about her first and second lives as well, because she has been known by many names: Nasya, Nasan, Orin, the Emissary, and in her fifth life, Orin again. Luckily for us, the entire story of the Emissary is displayed in a whole lore book from the Season of the Drifter called Ecdysis. I discussed this just a little bit in my reveal stream rundown for Edge of Fate, but I think the name of the book here and what we saw in the Emissary's cutscene are very much linked. Ecdysis is a word for the act of a snake shedding its skin. Symbolically, this is often used as an analogy for the beginning of a new phase of one's life, or for a new life generally. Snakes will shed their skin, of course, multiple times over their lives, and it makes a good degree of sense. Each time they do this, they tend to grow. It's also not unique to snakes, of course. The act of shedding one's skin happens all across the animal world. And I think, again, the word is really appropriate because look at how Orin escapes from the form of the Emissary in that cutscene, and yeah, this is her shedding a skin, straining against its old mounds. This is Ecdysis defined. Granted, it's a lot more violent than her shedding her skin, but still, I think it definitely fits. This is why, despite Orin being back in this moment, I'm content referring to this as her fifth life. She's Orin again, but I would bet anything that the experience of being the Emissary of the Nine has changed her. In the lore that we get from the Rite of the Nine, She describes her very being stretched like taffy as she experiences the fuller perspective of the Nine. She was shown the experiences of Thea's death as a scream that lasted for 400 years as it slowly flowed in a trajectory towards Earth, bound inexorably by the attraction of fatal gravity. You know that whole Vietnam vacant stare meme? Yeah, I think that's the emissary. It'd fit right at home. She's seen things that just nobody should have needed to see. Replace the horrors of war and bloodshed in that meme with the horrors of inconceivable cosmic phenomenon and yeah, you're pretty much there. No human mind should need to comprehend all of that. Anyway, returning to the start of the lore book, we can see the collection of all the various lives of the emissary, and it starts, of course, with a very simple human being. In her first life, she was known as Nasya Sarwar. She won a lottery for the International Exodus Program and won a space aboard the Exodus Program vessel that would be known as Exodus Green or Yang Liwei. She boarded the Yang Liwei as a Scopares at age 27. I think that's how you're meant to pronounce Scopares, but if I'm wrong, please let me know. The role of a Scopares was basically that of a glorified but still very important janitor, one who was a bit more technical about it. Ensuring that a spaceship is kept clean is a lot more important than keeping a home clean, purely on the basis that if your spaceship is in disarray, well, things go wrong and people could die. Nasya's ambition, though, was to prove her worth, so that she would either be granted a civilian cryopod aboard the Yang Liwei, of which there were roughly 30,000, or she would climb to the rank of Auturge, where she would watch over the ship's hydroponics. The interesting thing about Nasya, and one thing that makes her stand out in this and many other parts of her life, is that she is uniquely qualified as a go-between for other people. She was quadrilingual, meaning that she knew 4 languages. This allowed her to create connections with her fellow Scopares, and in turn, this meant that the other Scopares were able to use Nasya as a means of communicating with each other, which otherwise would have been impossible, because they only knew their own mother tongues. All of this would have been her only life, if the Yang Liwei had had anything other than an extraordinary destiny on its own horizon. Of course, it would all take place in the outer reaches of the solar system during the collapse. This was the birth of the Awoken. Captain Alice Lee would be caught in the events of the collapse and would petition the oncoming dark forces through a desperate series of messages going out into the dark. She begged the powers of darkness that were attacking her vessel to recognize that the Yang Liwei and its crew were a separate group of humanity that was not affiliated with the rest of humanity at large and the Traveler. Whether her plea was successful or not, light and dark in that moment seemed to collide, and a singularity was created near the Yang Liwei's position. It then began to get pulled into this singularity. A young woman called Mara was out on a tether on the outside of the hull of Yang Liwei, and was close to the gravities of the singularity. She would be the first to be pulled in, and she deliberately severed her connection to the vessel so that this would be the case. To cut a long story very short, Mara Sov was the first of the Awoken, though she definitely didn't display that at first. For Nasya, though, this was the beginning of her second life, as she was reborn amongst the other Awoken within the Distributory. She awoke in this second life with a new name, Nasan-A. Nasan-A started her life building up a small community around a tree that she had found, but she quickly realized that her desire was not to sit still, but instead to wander. And so she left, and tried her hand at many other professions that she found. She was at different times a corsair, a field hand, and a clerk for an atom merchant, but none of these professions could hold her down for long. Eventually, she found her way into another job and tried her hand at being a treasure hunter. In the process of doing some spelunking, she ran into Sieur Ido, and by extension was later introduced to Sieur's then leader, the lady whom she had sworn service to as a paladin, the Diasarim. The Diasarim was a figure who sparked the first conflict of the Awoken. She claimed that Alice Lee, the first Queen of the Awoken, had made them imperfect and had murdered their unborn cosmic divinity, creating them within a world where they would know suffering instead of immortality. All of this, of course, was arranged by Mara Sov, who would allow the Diasarim to speak for her and speak to her beliefs and move her own agenda forward, all while she was able to hold more of a acceptable, moderate stance publicly. This all gets into some very deep Awoken lore, so yes, if you're seeing the bigger picture and you know about what happens in the Mara Senna, please understand I'm giving the shortest, briefest look through some of these details. The Diasarim was the one who helped Nasan to pick out her calling as a translator. Now, this was an interesting choice and an interesting path because the Awoken mostly only had a single tongue, and yeah, supposedly there were small variations within it, but the mother tongue that they used was not something that required a translator. However, in this instance, the translation was not that of language, but more of intent. The word we would use nowadays is that of a diplomat. The Diasarim correctly saw that Nasan was one who had the power not only to end individual fights, but also to potentially put an end to whole wars. In the aftermath of the first war between the Awoken, Nasan helped them to heal their divisions. She refused to commit to a greater role in healing and uniting her people. A notable quote here is that Nasan did this because she believed that the most effective change happened when working in small groups of fewer than 10. And yes, that is a little nod to where her story goes in the future. As Mara Sov unveiled herself more publicly to the Awoken, and then unveiled her great purpose of proposing a return to the system of Sol away from the original Awoken homeworld, Nasan was introduced to her directly by Sieur Ido. In this moment, Mara implored Nasan to use her gifts as a translator to help the Awoken grieve the world that they were leaving behind, and in the end, Nasan knew that she would have to join Mara Sov and Sieur Ido and the many other Awoken that left the distributory behind. Nasan would be amongst those who would bear witness to the first time when the Awoken were a people that were once united and which were then riven truly in two. Nasan would also bear witness to the moment when this would happen again, in Sol's bounds, when the Awoken that followed Mara would split once more into the Reef-born Awoken and those that went to Earth to help those beneath the Traveler. At first, Nasan stayed with Mara, but it took her very little time to realize that her calling as a translator would lead her away from the Queen, and not for a version of the Queen, but more because she knew that she could be of service. She saw that she could be a useful ambassador between Mara Sov and the Awoken that had journeyed to Earth, and after contemplating this and talking to the Queen of the Reef about it, Mara agreed. She gave Nasan permission to leave, but stated that much like all the others, in whose footsteps she was following, she would never be permitted to return to the reef. Nasan understood, and left regardless to carry forth the word of Mara. It was here, under the night sky of her ancient homeworld, as Nasan camped out and waited to find more of her people, that her life was taken. This was the time of the Dark Ages, and in the brutal fashion that well defined that time period, Nasan was killed in her sleep by Lightbearers that found her, and thus her second life would come to an end. But, as we well know, this would be the beginning of something else. This would be where her third life began. Where once there had been Nasya and then there was Nasan-A, now she would be reborn again as a Lightbearer herself. Her ghost was called Gol, and Gol would quickly find a name for the guardian that they had risen, Orin. Orin would begin her new life alone other than with her ghost. She would quickly realize that she was not only drawn to blunt melee weapons, but also that she was prepared to live the life of a Titan. She started off with a crudely crafted club made from a fallen tree branch, but she would eventually graduate to a great warhammer. She would see the cruelty of the warlords of Earth, and felt the calling that all guardians do, to be a protector of those people who are innocent. I say Guardian, not Lightbearer here, and this is the group that she would eventually fall in with, others who would one day be recognized as the first Guardians. In particular, one of the first true orders of Titans. They would see her gift for holding out against all odds, and ultimately they would gift her with that great warhammer that I talked about earlier. This order of Titans was known as the Pilgrim Guard, and Orin would join them for a time. She would stand amongst their number as a great protector of humanity in its earliest days. She settled into a rhythm again, but just as Nassan experienced before her, after 20 years, the routine of the Pilgrim Guard began to wear her down. She confided in her ghost Gull that she knew she should want to stay, but that she didn't want to. She felt that her calling was elsewhere. The call of the Wanderer was reaching out to her once more, into her third life. Then, one fateful day, word reached the ears of the Pilgrim Guard about a new bastion of humanity, a town that was beneath the Traveler, a place that some were calling the Last City, and they set out to go and find it. When they did arrive, they realized that the word city at the time was a little generous. This was a ramshackle refugee camp like so many others in the Dark Ages, but within its bounds, Orin found her calling. Beneath the Traveler, she would choose to stay. The next time that the Pilgrim Guard made ready for an 18-month expedition, Orin did not choose to join them. Her companions would each respect her decision, even as they would grieve it. As a farewell, and as an expression of that grief, they each carved a notch into her warhammer. The notches were 9 in number. Yet again there is that note of the 9, but also of what Nassan stated in her second life, that she believed change was most possible in groups smaller than 10. And whilst perhaps she didn't grasp the exact same belief as Nassan, she still did not choose to join them on their next expedition. Whilst Orin was in the city, she looked for other Awoken as she had done this whole time. She was curious about who she was and where she had come from. There weren't many amongst the Risen, and there were even few amongst the Lightless, but when she did find them, she inquired about their people with endless questions. The one person to take her seriously was a man known as Namchi Sen. He was a pilot from the Reef, who had been sent to recover downed crows, Reef-made surveillance drones. His ship was downed and in need of repair, and so the two of them got to talking while he had time. Conversation turned to companionship, and when Namchi's vessel was eventually repaired, Orin convinced him to smuggle her to the Reef. She was fascinated by the people she had never known, and wished only to learn more. Unfortunately, their plan was cut very short by Galliot fighter craft flying the Reef's colors. They immediately picked up Namchi's vessel, and Orin was discovered. The two of them were brought before the Queen's Wrath, Sieur Ido. She was the first figure of authority to address the pair. Namchi admitted to helping smuggle Orin into the Reef, breaking the law that no Earthborn Awoken was permitted to return to the Reef after they had departed. Orin, being that illicit cargo, would suffer a different fate, but for his immediate admission, Namchi did at least win himself some favor with Sieur. She also looked to Orin, knowing that as Nassan are in her past life, this was a figure that might unsettle Mara. They both knew that there was always a chance that something like this had happened to Nassan, but Nassan's ecdysis into Orin was something completely different. When Orin met to meet Mara, the Queen wasn't actually as unsettled as Sieur might have thought, merely curious. Nassan had been reborn, but she had returned as a Lightbearer, and she had remembered fragments of the Queen. Orin did not know everything about who she had been, but Mara quickly informed her of the mission she had had in her past life. She had been the emissary between the Reefborn and Earthborn Awoken. She had been sent by order of the Queen, and she knew that she was never allowed to return. Orin was also informed of all that she wished to know. She learned of the schisms between the Awoken, between the Earth and Reefborn, between those of the Distributory perhaps, and those in the Reef as well. Orin had tackled things better than most could have, but these last few facts still left her in a bit of shock. Of course, there was a bigger problem in the moment. Her and Namchi had still broken the Queen's law, so they had to accept the Queen's justice, which, by the account of Orin's law, is harsh but fair. Namchi was punished to 5 years of indentured servitude to the Crown, which sounds very bad. That being said, he was apparently allowed to negotiate his own wages. Orin was initially supposed to be punished for Nassan's old broken oaths, but there was much philosophical debate about this notion, and it was decreed that Orin should not be held accountable for what she had done in her past life, and for oaths that she had broken that her past self had sworn. She couldn't remember making any of these oaths, she was none the wiser, and so she could not be punished for not knowing something like this. And so, her punishment was not as massive as it could have been, and yet it would still have a massive impact, just not in that moment. Her punishment was a boon, a service to the Crown at some point in the future, to be declared at a time of Mara Sov's choosing. She would also have to leave the Reef immediately. She knew this, accepted gladly, and returned to Earth, to stop, think, and understand what she would do next. During Namchi's 5-year sentence, the two of them maintained daily communications. When his sentence ended, Orin convinced him to return to her so that they might scour the system together and understand humanity. It's not stated exactly when this happened, but the two of them at this point were very thoroughly in love. It's also something where I don't think you can pinpoint a single moment at which this happens, but by the time that they started going through this period of scouring the system, working odd jobs, and being together even through all of the strangeness that would occur to them, it was clear that their time was rapturous. They were happy together, deliriously so. They were searching for nothing. Orin's wandering spirit was at peace. This continued until a fateful day centuries later when the Nine first truly began to interfere in Orin's story, at least in a tangible manner. Sieur Ido was dead. Mara Sov suspected that the Nine were the ones responsible. She contacted Orin and asked of her the boon of service that was a part of the justice for her past crimes. It was here that Orin's future would change irrevocably. Mara wished to know who had killed Sieur, and whether it was intentional or not. Orin would be her instrument of discovery, and so Orin would begin the quest that would define the rest of her third, and perhaps the whole of her fourth life. She would go forth, and she would seek the Nine. In her search, she wouldn't find Sieur Ido, but she would find the agent of the Nine known as Xur. That's Sir with an X, as opposed to Sieur with an S and a J. The shadowed, bent figure with a face of writhing tentacles would meet with Orin. It's here that we need to talk momentarily about something strange that followed Orin this entire time, at least through her 2 previous lives, which would now suddenly re-emerge in her third. A silver jar, perhaps an urn with a dented lid. It was with her on the Exodus Green, in the Distributory, and in the Reef. It was lost when Nassan R was killed by Lightbearers, and when she was reborn as Orin, there was no note of it being held within her person. It being silver, it might have been stolen by the Lightbearers. But in this moment, Xur was the one who produced this silver jar. Orin and Gol mistook it for a moment where the strange creature was about to produce a weapon and start firing. And so, Orin was faster. She struck Xur down with her warhammer, shattering him utterly, breaking his spine. But he didn't die instantly and didn't writhe in pain. Instead, she claimed the jar from Xur, and then tried to pry it open, pouring out a stream of grey powder, possibly someone's ashes. In fact, presumably someone's ashes. At this moment, Zur told her, "Dust returns. It ever returns." As he did this, he was laughing. The use of the word dust here I think is important because I think it's inserted here as a means of implying Orin's fate. The blood of the Nine is sometimes referred to as the dust of the planets and the systems. It is the detritus that is left on the surfaces of our worlds. By this logic, we are also star stuff made from the flesh of the Nine. In saying that dust returns, I think Zur was telling Orin that her next master would be the Nine, and that even if she should die and be reborn into a new life, that life would be in service to the Nine. All of this is interpretation, of course. Based on what happened next, I think it becomes all the more likely. From that moment onward, Orin began to experience waking hallucinations and terrible nightmares. She was aware of sensations that were not happening. Immaterial strangers spoke to her in unrecognizable tongues. She felt a crushing fist around her windpipe as she continued to seek the Nine on Mara's behalf. The sensation brought her to a place of anticipation for an imminent future. It seemed as though it was something that should terrify her, and yet, in that moment, it was something that simply made her feel unbearably lonely instead. Orin slowly began to break down, and her senses were being surrendered to the Nine. Synesthesia would bring her to the Nine over and over. She would see green and think Nine, read purple and taste Nine. Even as everyone from her ghost to Namchi to Mara told her to rest and hold off the hunt, she would not relent. She didn't just hunt for Sieur Ido anymore. She was hunting for herself. Her goal would be to find the agent of the Nine that she thought she had killed, the one who clearly must have survived, the one who knew more, the one who had brought these sensations to her. The figure with a writhing, shrouded face. She hunted Zur relentlessly in this process, and as she did, something else began hunting for someone precious to her. Namchi. He was aboard an awoken space installation known as the RSS Amestris when a mysterious astral predator of the system known as the Aphelion attacked. There are very few who still live who have survived the Aphelion, and Namchi was not amongst them. He died in horror like everyone else on the Amestris station. When Orin discovered this, she was months late to that knowledge. On that day, she met a man who called himself Wu Ming. At that time, he was a warmth in the darkness of Orin's life. He arrived with offers of assistance should she need it, and companionship should she need to talk. All he asked was of various different stories and all the information she'd learned of the Nine, and this was the hunt that she had obsessed herself with, and so she would oblige. We actually got a look into this moment thanks to the invitations of the Nine. Take a look.
I'm sorry. I really miss him.
Yeah, me too.
How did you say you knew each other again?
Oh, Namchi and me were buddies. Met in a little dive on Ceres. Used to play cards. He talked about you a lot. Said the Queen trusts you to talk to the Nine for her. That true?
Yeah, sort of. Doesn't seem important anymore.
Yeah. Well, you ever need a shoulder to cry on, I'm here for you.
A small note, yes, for those of you who didn't know, Wu Ming is another one of the Drifter's many aliases. In the aftermath of Namchi's death and the grief that consumed Orin, the two of them were briefly drawn to each other in a romantic sense. The trigger for all of this was seemingly not grief alone. It was their candidness with each other. Orin and Wu Ming were drawn together because as they spoke, They both quite uncharacteristically lowered their defenses, and for a time they were close, until Orin learned the truth of the Drifter's duplicitous nature. She learned of his other aliases, Eli, Dredge and Hope, the Drifter. There were some she didn't even name, such as Germaine. Regardless, the realization of all of this, as something she couldn't fix, as something that had yet again left her betrayed, it sent her into a rage, and left her even more isolated than she was before. And so once more, all she had was her quest, the boon that Mara Sov had asked of her. In this moment, as she felt that sense of parting and division, the lore says that the light left her too, which is strange because it is being a little bit coy about details. This could mean that her ghost Gol died, but it's left ambiguously. This could alternatively mean that she abandoned the call of the Guardians and let her powers of light fade somehow. Either way, she began to feel a calling from an unfamiliar voice out beyond the edges of the system. She felt the pull of the Nine. On the day she left the system, the Techians of the reef declared that she was Orin the Lost. She took only a few provisions, and she left, going far out beyond the heliopause, out into the deep nothingness, out into the hissing silence. The long walk. And there, at the end of her third life, Orin found a sudden death, and was reborn to shed her skin once more. She emerged anew as the emissary of the Nine. She was able to comprehend some of her old lives. She comprehended her will and her mission and the skills she had learned across all of her past lives. With these skills combined, she would be able to end wars. With these skills, she would be able to comprehend the Nine. I don't know if Orin would have truly gone to the Nine if it wasn't for the moment of weakness born of the Drifter's betrayal, but I also think she still keeps to her original mission from the Queen, finding Sieur's killers, and understanding if the Nine were those killers, and understanding if this was intentional or not, because murder requires intent. Her story was continued recently in the Animorphosis lorebook, where she defied the Nine after learning of something new. What exactly that something is so vague that I don't think I can adequately discuss it just yet, but whatever it was dramatic enough for Orin to decide that she needed to end her servitude and warn us immediately. She made her move and shed her skin once more. She is Orin once again now, but this is the beginning of her fifth life. And this time she would not allow her skills to be used by the Nine. This time, she would allow her skills to end wars for good. This time, she would make her own choices. Anyway, that's all from me for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. We will inevitably be talking about more of Orin, the Emissary story, and as we do, that will be stuff that you guys can expect to see here on the channel, so go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. And of course, let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments section. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, has been quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Bife. Orodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.